My name is Zara Ellison, and I want you to understand something before I tell you this story. I was not looking for anything that night. I was not looking for love, I was not looking for danger, and I was absolutely 100% not looking for him. I was looking for my best friend, Camille. Camille had called me 40 minutes before, her voice doing that thing it does when she's had 2 glasses of champagne and made a decision she hasn't fully thought through. She said, "Zara baby, I need you to come to this event. It's a private thing at Jade Pavilion, and my date just cancelled and I already told everyone you were coming. And please, please, please." And I said no, and then she sent me the dress. A courier showed up at my apartment door holding a garment bag from a boutique I couldn't afford to look at through a window. And inside was a floor-length black gown with a low back and a single gold-threaded stripe running diagonally from the left shoulder to the right hip. It fit like it had been made for me, which, knowing Camille, it probably had been. She'd taken my measurements during a spa weekend 2 months before and I'd thought nothing of it. I should have known. So that's how I ended up standing in front of the mirror at 9:47 p.m. on a Friday. Hair swept up, gold earrings. My grandmother left me hanging from my ears, telling myself I was only going for 2 hours and then I was leaving. The Jade Pavilion sat at the edge of the financial district, tucked between a building that housed 3 law firms and another that I was fairly certain was a money laundering front. Though I didn't know that then. I knew it as a restaurant that appeared in lifestyle magazines, the kind of place where the menu had no prices and the reservations had a 6-month waitlist. Camille moved in circles where places like this were casual. I moved in circles where we celebrated promotions at spots with happy hour specials, and we loved every second of it. But I was here now. The man at the door looked at me the way people look at someone they weren't expecting. Not rudely, but with a particular attention that made me straighten my spine without meaning to. I gave Camille's name. He checked something on a tablet. He stepped aside. The inside of the Jade Pavilion at night, during a private event, is something I will spend the rest of my life being unable to fully describe. It wasn't loud in the way clubs are loud. It was loud in the way power is loud. A low, humming, constant roar of people who all knew each other's secrets and were pretending they didn't. The lighting was warm amber. The centerpieces were black orchids in tall crystal vases. There were at least 200 people in that room, and every single one of them looked like they belonged there. I found Camille within minutes because Camille has a laugh that cuts through any crowd like a beam of light. She was standing near the bar, radiant in burgundy, her natural hair pinned up with what I recognized as her "I'm networking aggressively tonight. Look!" She grabbed my hands the moment she saw me. "You look unreal," she said, and she said it the way Camille says everything, like it's the truest thing she's ever spoken. "You sent me a gown," I said, "from a boutique that doesn't have prices on their website." "I simply enabled you," she said, handing me a glass of something sparkling that was probably worth more than my electric bill. I laughed. I couldn't not. That was Camille's gift. She introduced me to people whose names I immediately forgot. A woman who was something in finance, a man who was something in tech, a couple who were something in real estate. Everybody was something. I was an interior designer with my own small firm, 3 years old, doing well but not this well. And I had learned a long time ago that in rooms like this, you either apologize for your smallness or you own your wholeness. I owned it. I always do. It was about an hour in my second glass of whatever they kept giving me, a conversation with a woman named Patricia who was genuinely, surprisingly interesting when I realized I needed to find the restroom. Camille was deep in conversation across the room. I excused myself from Patricia and went looking. Now here's where I need to be very precise because this moment matters. The restrooms in the Jade Pavilion's main event space were down a hallway. I could see the sign from where I was standing. But the hallway was partially blocked by a cluster of people having what looked like an intense, quiet disagreement, and I didn't want to navigate through it. I noticed a secondary corridor to my left, partially hidden behind a decorative screen of hanging jade beads. It looked like it curved in the same general direction. Hotels and restaurants like this almost always have the restrooms accessible from multiple corridors. so I went left. The corridor was quieter. The amber lighting gave way to something cooler and dimmer. The sounds of the main room fell away with surprising speed. These walls were thick, designed to keep sound contained. My heels clicked softly on the marble floor. I followed the curve of the hallway past a large abstract painting I would have loved to study in better lighting, past a closed door that vibrated slightly with the sound of refrigeration units behind it. And then I turned a corner. And I walked directly into a room I was never supposed to see. It was not a large room. It was intimate in the way that rooms meant for serious business are intimate. A round table, dark wood, 8 chairs, and 6 men seated in them. There was no event decor in this room. No orchids, no champagne. There was a tumbler of something amber near every hand, and documents on the table that I couldn't read from where I stood, and a phone in the center playing something in Korean at a low volume. Every head turned toward me, and I felt it before I understood it. The temperature change in a room when something dangerous looks at you. Different ages, all Korean, all wearing the kind of suits that don't come off a rack. And at the head of the table, not because the table was shaped that way, but because the gravity of the room simply organized itself around him, was a man who looked at me with the most perfectly controlled expression I had ever seen on a human face. No anger. No alarm. Just a stillness so complete it was somehow louder than alarm would have been. He was younger than I expected, for someone who sat at a table like that, in a room like that, with men looking at him. The way these men looked at him. Early 30s maybe? Black hair, neat, sharp jaw, dark eyes that caught the light once, briefly, and then settled back into that terrifying calm. He had his hands folded on the table in front of him, and he did not move them. He simply looked at me. And I stood there, in my black dress and my grandmother's earrings, holding an empty champagne flute. One wrong turn past where I was supposed to be, staring directly at the most dangerous man I had ever been in a room with, without knowing a single thing about him yet. I said. Wrong door. I'm so sorry. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The man at the head of the table tilted his head a fraction of an inch, just barely, and said, in English so precise it felt architectural, "Are you lost?" His voice was low. It didn't raise itself for the room leaned in for it. Clearly, I said, because when I am frightened my sarcasm reflex fires before my self-preservation instinct. And this is a character flaw I've been aware of for years and have never successfully corrected. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not exactly. But the corner of his mouth moved in a way that suggested he had encountered something unexpected, and had not yet decided what to do about it. One of the other men at the table started to rise, his hand moving toward his jacket in a way that I was choosing not to analyze, but the man at the head of the table raised 2 fingers, just 2, barely lifted from the table surface, and the man sat back down. "Marcus," the man at the head of the table said, still looking at me, and a figure materialized at my elbow. A black man, broad-suited, who had apparently been standing in a corner of the corridor I had somehow not registered, which told me something alarming about my powers of observation in a crisis. "Please escort our guest back to the main event," the man at the table said, "and make sure she has a fresh drink." Marcus touched my elbow gently, professionally, and I let him guide me backward out of the corridor because there was no universe in which I was about to argue. The last thing I saw before I turned was the man at the head of the table, still watching me, his hands still folded, his expression still that same controlled, calibrated stillness. Like I was a question he had just decided to keep thinking about. Marcus walked me to the bar without a word. He procured a glass of champagne from somewhere and placed it in my hand and said, "Enjoy your evening, ma'am." And then he was gone. And I was standing at the bar with a full glass and a heart rate that my fitness tracker would have flagged as a concern. Camille found me 3 minutes later. "There you are, where did you—" She looked in my face. "Zara, what happened?" "I walked into the wrong room," I said. "Okay," she said carefully. There were men in it. What kind of men? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the stillness, the two fingers, the way the room organized itself around one person. The kind, I finally said, that you don't walk in on. Camille's eyes widened. She grabbed my arm and leaned in close and said, very quietly, Zara, did you just walk into a room with Hyunjae Kwon? The name meant nothing to me then. I don't know, I said. Who is that? She looked at me for a long moment with an expression I can only describe as someone deciding how much information to give a person who is standing next to a fire they don't know is a fire yet. He's nobody, she said. Let's go get some food. But her hand on my arm was tighter than it needed to be, and Camille was a terrible liar, and I knew her well enough to know that nobody meant exactly the opposite. I should have left then. I should have claimed a headache, kissed Camille on the cheek, gone home, made tea, watched something forgettable and gone to sleep. Instead, I let her steer me toward the food stations, and I ate tiny perfect things off tiny perfect plates, and I laughed at the right moments in conversations, and I stayed for another hour. And for that entire hour I did not look toward the secondary corridor. Not once. Not because I wasn't thinking about it, but because some part of me, the part that has always been braver and more foolish than the rest of me in equal measure, already understood that looking would mean something. It was only when Camille and I were in the car home, her driver navigating the quiet streets, that I let myself think about it. The room, the table, the men, the stillness. Are you lost? I stared out the window at the city lights blaring past, and I thought, yes, I think I might be. But not in the way he meant. I Googled him the next morning. I want to be clear that I'm not proud of this. I told myself it was practical. I told myself that if I had accidentally stumbled into the private meeting of someone significant, it was simply responsible adult behavior to understand the nature of that significance. I had my coffee. I had my Saturday morning. I sat cross-legged on my couch in my oldest, most comfortable sweatshirt, and I typed the name Camille had whispered like it was something that could hear itself being spoken. Hyunjae Kwon? The results that came back were curated in the way that only truly powerful people's results are curated, which is to say, there was just enough to tell you he existed, and almost nothing to tell you who he really was. I hear a few mentions in business publications, a profile in a Seoul-based financial magazine from 3 years ago which I had translated by copy-pasting it into a translation tool that described him as a prominent entrepreneur with diversified holdings across hospitality, logistics, and private equity. There was a photograph, just one, and it looked like it had been taken at some kind of charity function. Him in the background, partially turned away from the camera, as if he'd sensed the lens and angled himself out of its reach. Even in a blurry photograph, the stillness was visible. There was nothing else. No social media, no interviews, no controversy, which in the age of the internet meant either that he'd done nothing worth reporting or that he'd made very certain nothing worth reporting could find its way out. I closed the laptop. I finished my coffee. I went about my Saturday. I had a full life, and I want you to understand that clearly, because stories like this sometimes make it seem like the woman was simply waiting for the man to arrive and give her life meaning. And that is not who I am, and it is not what this was. I had built my interior design firm from nothing. From a card table in my first apartment, from unpaid favors for friends who let me redo their spaces and photograph the results, from years of grinding and studying and refusing to believe that the industry had no room for someone who looked like me doing what I loved. By that Saturday morning, I had a team of 4, a studio space on the 3rd floor of a building I was very proud to be able to afford, and a wait list of clients. I had Marcus, my oldest friend from college, who was funny and loyal and called me every Sunday. I had Camille, who was chaos and love in equal measure. I had my grandmother's earrings and my mother's stubbornness and my own particular kind of quiet confidence that people sometimes mistook for coldness, and I had long since stopped trying to correct them. I was fine. I was genuinely absolutely fine. Which is why it was deeply inconvenient when, 11 days after the Jade Pavilion, a potential new client inquiry arrived in my studio inbox with a project description that made every professional instinct I had stand up at attention. The inquiry was for a full renovation of a penthouse in the Meridian Tower, full creative control, substantial budget described as flexible, timeline of 4 months, immediate start. The property was listed as belonging to a holding company called JKH Meridian LLC. The point of contact was listed simply as M. Barnes, executive assistant to Mr. Kwan. I read the email 3 times. Then I called Camille. Camille, I said, I need you to tell me everything you know about Hyun Jae Kwan, and I need you to not do the thing where you protect me by leaving out the parts. I actually need to know. There was a pause on her end, a long one. How much of your Saturday are you giving me? She finally said. All of it, I said. She came over within the hour, with pastries and the kind of expression that told me she had been waiting for this conversation, had possibly been dreading it, and had definitely rehearsed parts of it. She sat across from me at my kitchen table and she told me what she knew. Hyun Jae Kwan was the head of what she described as carefully, with measured words, a very old, very powerful Korean organization with business interests that are not entirely the kind of business interests that appear in annual reports. She said it the way people say things when they're aware that saying them plainly creates a kind of liability. I appreciated the care. I also heard exactly what she was telling me. His family had roots going back generations in Seoul. Old money layered on top of older influence, layered on top of something that had never needed to name itself to be understood. He had come to this city 4 years ago, and in 4 years had become something that this city's existing power structures were still trying to figure out how to respond to. Not because he was violent, or rather, not because violence was his primary language, but because he was smart in the kind of way that makes violence almost unnecessary. He understood systems, he understood leverage, he understood how cities actually work versus how they claim to work, and he moved in the space between those two things with a fluency that was, by all accounts, breathtaking to witness. The people who were afraid of him were afraid quietly. The people who respected him did so with a certain careful distance. And nobody, Camille told me, walking into a private meeting of his and simply walking back out with nothing worse than a glass of champagne was not a normal thing that happens, Zara. That's what I'm saying. I sat with that. He wants to hire me, I said. Camille closed her eyes briefly. I know, she said. How do you know? Because he asked about you. The kitchen was quiet. Through my window, the Saturday sounds of the city continued, peacefully, indifferent to the fact that my life had just introduced an entirely new variable without asking my permission. He asked about me, I repeated. Someone called my phone 2 days after the event. An assistant. They asked how I knew you, what you did professionally, if you were. And this is the exact word they used: established. And you told them? I told them you were the best interior designer I knew, and that you had a studio and a waitlist and that you were talented beyond what you charged for, Camille said. Because all of that is true, and because I was not going to lie to people who I have the sense to not lie to. I stood up. I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at nothing in particular, and thought about a man with his hands folded on a dark wood table, and 2 fingers barely lifted. And are you lost? What would you do? I asked. Camille was quiet for a moment, but then she said, I would think about it very seriously, and then I would make a decision based on what Zara Ellison wants. Not what makes sense on paper, not what's safe, what you want. I want the project, I said before I fully realized I was going to say it. The project, Camille said carefully. The project, I confirmed very firmly, choosing to ignore whatever she meant by the careful way she'd repeated it. I responded to the inquiry professionally. I outlined my process, my rates, my timeline requirements. I asked for details about the space, the client's preferences, any existing architectural constraints. I sent it and I closed my laptop and I went to the gym and I worked out so hard my legs hurt for 2 days, which was absolutely unrelated. Marcus Barnes, I would later understand the same Marcus who had materialized at my elbow in the corridor, responded within 2 hours. Had he sent floor plans, photographs of the current space, a document titled simply Preferences and Parameters that turned out to be one of the most interesting documents I had ever read professionally. It was meticulous. Whoever had written it understood space, understood the relationship between aesthetics and function, understood the way light moved through rooms at different hours and what that meant for material choices. There were notes on how different textures affected the sensory experience of a room. There were preferences expressed with specificity and without apology. Dark woods, clean lines, no ornamentation for ornamentation's sake, privacy as a design principle rather than an afterthought. It read in certain ways like a portrait. I accepted the project. The first meeting was at the studio, which I insisted on. My space, my terms that felt important, even if I couldn't have explained exactly why. Marcus came in person to confirm the details and sign the initial paperwork. He was professional, efficient, and gave almost nothing away, which I was beginning to understand was a standard operating mode for everyone in this particular orbit. When he left, my assistant Priya, 24 years old, frighteningly capable, curious about everything, looked at me, with her head tilted. "Who's the client?" she asked. "A private individual," I said. "The holding company is JKH Meridian," she said, which told me she had already researched it. I couldn't find much about who JKH is. "That's fine," I said. "We're designing for the space, not the biography." She accepted this with the particular expression of someone filing a question away for later. I spent that evening in the studio after everyone had gone, spreading the floor plans across my largest work table and beginning to think. This is my favorite part of any project, the before. When the space is still just potential, when I can see everything it might become and nothing has been committed to yet. The penthouse was extraordinary. 3 floors, 12-foot ceilings on each level, floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, a rooftop terrace that the photographs showed as currently underutilized, just concrete and ambient city light. It was the kind of space that could become cold if you let it. All that glass and height could make a person feel exposed, observed, diminished by the scale of their own rooms. But it didn't have to be that way. I started sketching. I thought about the preferences and parameters document, privacy as a design principle. I thought about a man who had one photograph in existence and had turned partially away from even that. I thought about what it might mean to be someone who lived at the center of enormous power and enormous visibility and choose relentlessly to keep the interior of his life contained. A home like that should feel like armor that was also a refuge, strong enough to be a retreat, private enough to allow breathing room. I started to see it, the layered lighting, the materials that absorbed rather than reflected, the way the rooftop could be transformed into something that felt enclosed and expansive at the same time. I worked until midnight. I went home with charcoal on my fingers and the beginning of a vision in my chest, that low, warm hum that tells me when a project is going to be something real. I did not think about him. Or rather, I thought about the space, and the space was his, and somewhere in the overlap between those two things I understood that I was going to see him again. I just didn't know that the second time would be nothing like the first. The second time he would come to me. He did not warn me. That was the first thing. No call from Marcus, no email from the assistant's assistant, no heads up of any kind. One moment I was standing in the gutted shell of what would become his living room, wearing my work clothes, high-waisted trousers, a cream blouse, my hair in a puff because I was working and not performing, holding paint swatches up to the afternoon light coming through the west-facing windows. And then the elevator opened. And he walked out. I heard it before I turned, the clean, mechanical sound of the elevator. the soft pressure change of the doors, and when I turned, he was already in the room, and he stopped when he saw me, and for one fraction of a second before the mask came down fully, I saw something move across his face. Recognition. But more than recognition. Recognition colored by something he didn't seem entirely pleased to be feeling. "Mr. Kwan," I said. My voice was professional and level, and I'm still proud of that. "Miss Ellison," he said. He was in a different kind of suit today. Still dark, still perfect, but more restrained. The kind of clothing that says power without shouting it. He looked at the space around him the way I'd seen him look at me in that room, taking in everything, filing it, committing to nothing visible. "I wasn't told you'd be here today," I said. "No," he agreed simply, as if notification were optional for him, which I was rapidly understanding it was. I held my ground, physically and otherwise. I turned back to the window and held up the swatch I'd been considering, a deep, warm slate, almost charcoal without going all the way there against the concrete of the structural pillar. "I'm working on the primary living area," I said. "The architectural bones are strong, which means we don't need to decorate loudly. The question is depth versus warmth, whether you want a space that commands or one that holds." I felt him move into the room properly, not toward me, just into the space, the way someone does when they're assessing something. "What's the difference?" he asked. I turned. He was standing near the center of the room, looking at the windows rather than at me. "A space that commands," I said, "makes you aware of its power when you're in it. High contrast, strong geometry, materials that reflect. It projects. People who walk into it feel the room first. It contains materials that absorb sound and light rather than throwing them back. Layered warmth. You walk in and the volume of everything, including your own thoughts, comes down. It's still powerful, but the power turns inward rather than outward." He looked at me then. "You read the document Marcus sent," he said. "Several times," I said. Something in his expression shifted barely, but I was beginning to calibrate to the barely. "Which would you recommend?" he asked. "A space that holds," I said without hesitation. "Because you already project. The room doesn't need to do that work. What you need is somewhere that gives it back." The silence that followed was the longest one that had happened in my professional life without becoming uncomfortable. He stood there and looked at me with that dark, calibrated gaze, and I stood there and met it, because I have never been the kind of woman who looks away first. Finally he said, "Show me." So I showed him. For the next hour and a half, I walked him through everything I had been developing: the material palette, the lighting strategy, the flow between the 3 floors, the rooftop vision. I showed him sketches and samples and the 3D renderings Priya had started building. I talked about the space the way I always talk about spaces when I'm deep inside a project, with full authority, with specificity, with the particular kind of passion that I have learned to stop apologizing for and simply let exist. He asked questions. This surprised me. People in his position, men who hired people like me, often let their presence in these conversations be purely ceremonial, a rubber stamp, an appearance of engagement that doesn't actually engage. He engaged. His questions were precise and thoughtful and occasionally revealed a depth of aesthetic understanding that I hadn't expected. He asked why I'd chosen to leave the eastern wall largely uninterrupted rather than building and shelving. I told him because the morning light on that wall at full strength was architectural in itself, and to compete with it would be a loss. He looked at the wall for a moment and then said, "Yes, and that was that." He asked about the rooftop. I showed him the sketches, the layered planting zones that would create privacy screens at standing height, the central low platform meant for seated gatherings of 6 to 8, the lighting that I had designed to be warm enough to erase the fluorescent harshness of the city skyline. Beyond, while not being so dramatic, it drew attention from the street below. He looked at the sketches for a long moment. "You understood the privacy requirement," he said. "It's in the parameters," I said. "But also, I paused, because I was about to say something that crossed a professional line in a direction I wasn't sure about. I said it anyway. A person in your position lives under a certain kind of constant visibility. Your home should be the one place that genuinely can't see you. The design should actively protect that. He looked at me. What do you know about my position? He asked. There was no threat in it. It was a genuine question with careful walls around it. Very little, I said. And I'm not interested in more. I'm interested in what the space needs. What you need from the space. He held my gaze for a moment in that way. He had absolute, unblinking, like looking into still water and finding it goes further down than you thought. Carry on with the design, he said. The direction is correct. He left 20 minutes later. He did not say goodbye so much as he simply moved toward the elevator, and Marcus, who had apparently been waiting in the corridor this entire time, stepped forward to accompany him. At the elevator, he paused without turning around. Miss Ellison, he said. Yes? The rooftop, the planting zones, can they be year-round? With the right species selection and some heated planters, yes. A pause. Good, he said. And then the elevator closed and he was gone. I stood alone in the gutted shell of his future living room for a full 2 minutes before I moved. I stood there in the afternoon light, the same light I had just described to him. The light I'd said was architectural in itself, and I had a very quiet, very private, very honest conversation with myself. A conversation that went something like, Zara, pay attention. This is the part where you decide something. Because here is what I knew standing there. I had just spent 90 minutes with a man who ran something I did not fully understand and did not need to. A man with one photograph in existence and a document sent through 2 layers of assistance. A man who tilted his head 1/4 of an inch and made rooms hold their breath. And the conversation had been entirely professional. And also the most interesting conversation I had in 6 months. And that, right there, was the beginning of the problem. I gathered my swatches. I rolled up my sketches. I took the elevator down. On the ride to my studio, I called Camille. He showed up at the site, I said. A pause. And, she said. And nothing. We talked about the design. Camille. Did he look at you like... We talked about the design, I said again. I'm going home. She let me go. But that night, lying in the dark, I thought about a man who had shown up at a project site without announcement, and walked into a gutted room and stood in the afternoon light and asked questions that told me he had read everything I'd sent, understood it, and come in person anyway. People who send assistants don't show up themselves. Not unless they have a reason. And whatever his reason was, I understood lying there in the dark with the city sighing outside my window that I was going to have to be very, very careful. With him. With the project. And most of all with myself. There are things you learn about powerful men from the way other people say their names. Not from what people say, exactly, most people are too careful for that, but from the pause before they say it. From the particular calibration of their voice when they reach for the name, like they're picking something up they know is heavy and want to demonstrate they can handle the weight. That's how I started learning about Hyun-jae Kwon. The project required me to coordinate with a range of contractors, suppliers, and building management personnel standard process for a renovation of this scale. And what I discovered in those initial weeks of coordination was that every person in that orbit had a relationship with his name. Different relationships, but all of them characterized by that pause. The building manager of Meridian Tower, a steady, competent woman named Darlene, who I had worked with on 2 previous projects in the building, when I mentioned the name of the client, went very quiet for a moment and then said, "He's a careful man. You'll be fine as long as you're straight with him." And I noted the word straight, not nice, not professional, not talented, but straight, which told me something. The contractor I brought in for the structural work, a man I had used many times and trusted completely when he reviewed the site documentation and understood who owned the unit, said only, "I'll make sure my team understands this job gets done right." He didn't say gets done on time, or gets done within budget. He said right. And the emphasis on right was the emphasis of someone who had heard from some source, some story about what happened when things weren't done right for this particular client. And my materials supplier, a warm, expansive man named Bernard who I adored, who talked too much and knew everything about the logistics of every material I'd ever asked him to source when I told him about the project, said, Oh, the Quan penthouse. Okay, yeah, we'll prioritize that." And then looked like he wanted to say something more and decided not to, and I let him not say it because I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. The silence around him was not the silence of anonymity. It was the silence of people who had learned that silence was the smart choice. I sat with all of this. I filled it alongside what Camille had told me, alongside my own Google search that had produced almost nothing, alongside the preferences and parameters document that was simultaneously a revelation and a closed door. I want to be clear about something. I was not naive. I was not a woman who floated through the world unable to read what was in front of her. I understood with a precision that I found I could not quite make myself look at directly what diversified holdings meant in the context of an organization that made people speak carefully and move respectfully. I had grown up in a city. I had loved people who lived in complicated worlds. I was not sheltered. What I was, and this is the honest version, was interested anyway. Not in the danger. I want to be very precise about this. Not in the power. Not in the dark-suited stillness or the absence of his photographs or the way Marcus materialized from corridors like a shadow that had learned a dress code. I was interested in the question he had become. Because in the time since our conversation in the penthouse, I had replayed it, not obsessively. Just in the honest way you replay conversations that contained something worth thinking about. And what I kept returning to was not the things he had said, but the way he had listened. He and Jaquan listened to me talk about a space, about light on a wall, about materials that absorbed versus reflected, about what a person needs from the place they live, with an attention that was total. Not performative, not polite, total. Like every word I said was being weighed for its actual content. Do you know how rare that is? I meet people constantly. Clients, vendors, collaborators, acquaintances, people at Camille's events. Most people listen in order to speak. They are composing their response while you are still mid-sentence. They are elsewhere in themselves while they nod at you. It is simply how people are, and I do not say this to be harsh. It is simply the ordinary way that human attention tends to distribute itself. He did not do this. When I spoke, he was entirely there. And I found that I could not stop thinking about it, which was inconvenient. Meanwhile, the work was extraordinary. 3 weeks in, the space was beginning to reveal itself the way a space does when you're doing it right. Not imposing a vision on top of it, but reading what it already wanted to be and giving it the language for that. The primary materials had been sourced and confirmed: black walnut for the major millwork, a honed basalt tile for the floors, linen and leather in a warm complex palette of charcoal and deep amber, and something between cream and bone. Glass but deliberately frosted in certain places, panels that admitted light but denied surveillance. Privacy translated into texture. Priya was flourishing. She had taken ownership of the rooftop design and was evolving it beyond my original sketches in ways that delighted me. She had identified a combination of Japanese maples and ornamental grasses that would create the privacy screening I'd imagined while also providing color through 3 seasons. She presented it to me one morning with the particular pride of someone who knows they've solved a problem well, and I told her so. Marcus came by twice, inspected progress, took photographs, sent questions from his employer through a series of emails that were precise and showed clearly that every photograph had been studied and every detail had been noticed. I responded in kind, precise, professional, thorough. It was a good system. And then, 4 weeks in, on a Thursday afternoon when I was alone in the space doing a lighting assessment, standing on a ladder checking the angle of a recessed fixture, the elevator opened. I knew before I turned. I don't know how to explain that, but I knew. "Miss Ellison," he said. "Mr. Kwan," I said from the ladder, not coming down. He looked up at me. Something almost moved across his face. "You're alone," he said. "Assessment day. I sent the crew home." "Is that safe?" I looked down at him. "I've been on job sites alone for 8 years. I'm fine." He looked at the ladder. He looked at the ceiling. He looked back at me with the expression of someone choosing not to say what they're thinking. "The millwork arrived," I said, redirecting. "Come look." I climbed down and I walked him through the delivered materials. The walnut panels for the main cabinetry stacked and wrapped along the north wall. The basalt tile samples laid out in a grid on the floor so I could assess the pattern variations. I crouched down and pointed out how the natural variation in the stone created a subtle depth when you laid it in a specific orientation. He crouched down next to me. We were close. Not inappropriately, just close in the way that looking at something small on the floor puts two people in proximity. I could see the detail of his suit jacket, the clean line of his jaw, the careful way he looked at the tiles with genuine attention. "This one," he said, indicating a tile with a particular depth of variation. "That's the one I chose," I said. He looked at me sidelong. "Of course it is," he said. And it wasn't quite a smile, but it was the nearest thing I had seen from him, and it sat in my chest in a way that I was going to need to address. We stood up together. I moved to the window. He stayed where he was. "4 more weeks to substantial completion?" he asked. "If the custom lighting pieces arrive on schedule, yes." "And if they don't?" 5 weeks, still within the contracted window. He nodded. He turned and looked at the room, the whole room, the scope of it, what it was becoming. "It's better than I expected," he said. "It usually is," I said, and then wanted to take it back because it sounded arrogant, but he made a sound, low, brief, almost silent, that took me a moment to classify. He was laughing. Not loudly, not openly, but somewhere in the controlled quiet of him there was the shape of laughter. I felt it like a small, private earthquake. "I'll tell Marcus to confirm the delivery schedule," he said, moving toward the elevator, back to himself, back to the composure that seemed to be both natural and chosen. "Thank you for coming by," I said. At the elevator he paused, not turning. Again. "Miss Ellison." "Yes." "Have dinner with me." The elevator was there, ready, doors open. He had said it to the elevator doors, not to me. As if he'd decided to say it at the last possible moment before the decision became irreversible. I stood in the room. He was paying me to transform for him in my work clothes with charcoal on my hand from where I'd been sketching, and I looked at the back of his head and thought about every sensible thing I knew. "That would complicate a professional relationship," I said. A pause. "Yes," he said, "it would." "Is that a concern for you?" Another pause. "I'm asking anyway," he said. The elevator waited. I thought about Camille saying make a decision based on what Zara Ellison wants. I thought about a man who listened with total attention. I thought about the almost laugh that had moved through his controlled stillness like a line of light under a closed door. "Not dinner," I said. "Coffee." He turned then, just slightly, just enough for me to see the edge of his profile. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," I agreed. And then the elevator closed and the room was mine again, and I stood in the amber light of the late afternoon and thought, "Zara Ellison, what are you doing?" The space didn't answer. But the light was warm, and the walnut was beautiful, and something in the room felt like it had shifted into the shape it was always meant to take. He chose a place that surprised me. I had expected I don't know what I had expected. Somewhere, private, probably. Somewhere secured in the same way the back room of the Jade Pavilion had been secured, deliberately inaccessible, insulated by design. A back booth in a place with heavy curtains and a maitre d' who owed him something. He chose a coffee shop. Not the fancy kind. Not a place that appeared on lists. A corner cafe in a quieter part of the Midtown neighborhood with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls that was earnestly mediocre, and a chalk menu board with 3 spelling errors and the best Ethiopian pour-over I had ever tasted in my life. I arrived 2 minutes early and he was already there. This surprised me too. Men who project the kind of authority he projected often manage time as a form of dominance, keeping people waiting as a statement. He was there before me, with 2 cups already on the table, having apparently ordered for both of us. I stopped at the table. "You ordered for me," I said. "You don't strike me as a latte person," he said. "I ordered the pour-over. If I was wrong, tell me." I sat down. I took the cup. The pour-over was perfect. "You weren't wrong," I said. "Good," he said. He was in different clothes, the first time I had seen him in anything other than a suit. Dark trousers still, but a simple black sweater, high neck, no jacket. He looked younger was the wrong word. More present, maybe. Like without the armor of the full suit, something slightly more actual was visible. I wondered if he'd done it intentionally. I suspected everything about him was intentional. "I've been thinking about what you said," he said, "about the space it holds." I hadn't expected that to be his opener. I had expected. Actually, I didn't know what I'd expected. I had never had coffee with a man like this. "What about it?" I said. "I have spent a significant portion of my life," he said, looking at the cup in his hands rather than at me, "in spaces that command. Buildings, rooms, environments designed to project. I didn't think about the alternative." "Did you want one?" "I didn't know I was allowed to," he said. And that sentence said quietly, without self-pity, simply as an observation about the architecture of his own life, landed somewhere in me with a precision that had no business existing in a conversation about interior design. I looked at him across the mismatched table, in the coffee shop that was not what I expected, in the black sweater that made him look like someone who might be allowed to have a Saturday morning, and I understood something. Hyun-jae-kwon was dangerous. Not in the way I'd been warning myself about, not dangerous to me, or not only that. He was dangerous in the way all people are dangerous when they are intelligent and self-aware and lonely in a particular way that they've never had words for before. That is the most dangerous kind of person, because they recognize themselves in you. And you recognize them back. "Tell me something," I said. "Not about the space, something else." He looked up. "What do you want to know?" "Anything you're willing to say." A long pause. The cafe moved around us. 2 women at the next table laughing, the sound of the grinder, someone's dog visible through the window, trotting past with enormous self-satisfaction. "I grew up in Seoul," he said, "in a house where nothing was spoken directly. Everything was implied. The implication was the communication. I became very good at it." "And now you prefer plain speech," I said. He looked at me steadily. "When I can afford to." "Can you now?" "I think so," he said. "You have not given me any reason to think otherwise." I drank my coffee. I thought about that. "My mother was the most direct person I've ever known," I said. "She said what she thought, fully. Not rudely, but without, I searched for the word, without performance. She was whoever she was in every room. I used to think that was just her. I think I understand now that it was a choice she made every day." He was listening in that way. He had total presence, total attention. "She's gone?" he asked. 3 years ago," I said. "Yes." "I'm sorry." And the thing was, it sounded like he meant it. Not the social version of, "I'm sorry," the 3-word reflex we all deploy because we've been taught to. It sounded like genuine sorrow for a loss that wasn't his but that he could feel the shape of anyway. "Thank you," I said. We sat for a moment in something that was not quite silence. There was the cafe around us but had the quality of silence. The quality of two people having decided, without saying so, to be real with each other for a defined and limited period of time. "Why coffee and not dinner?" he asked. Evening implies certain kinds of conclusions, I said. Coffee is neutral. Coffee says, let's see if we can be in the same room with honest intentions before we complicate anything. And can we? Apparently, I said. The corner of his mouth moved. You're not what I expected, he said. I'm exactly what I presented, I said. You just didn't have enough data. No, he agreed. I didn't. He looked at me for a moment, a measured look, the kind that doesn't flinch but also doesn't perform. There are things about my life, he said carefully, that are complicated, that I won't ask someone else to navigate without understanding them fully. I think that's fair to say. It's fair, I said, and I appreciate it. I wanted to be clear about that before. He paused. Before you ask if there can be a dinner, I finished. He held my gaze. The cafe hummed. The dog outside was gone. The two women at the next table were leaving, still laughing, gathering their coats in the good-natured, slow way of a Saturday morning with nowhere urgent to be. I thought about sensible things. I thought about professional complications. I thought about Camille's face when she found out, which was going to be absolutely insufferable. I thought about a room that holds instead of commands and what it means to choose that and who is allowed to choose it. Yes, I said. He looked at me. Yes. Something moved across his face. Then something I hadn't seen before. Something that wasn't the calibrated stillness and wasn't the almost smile and wasn't the listening attention. Something that was, for just a moment, entirely unguarded. It was only there for a second. But I saw it. And I thought, oh. Because that 1 second of being, briefly, unhidden, told me more than everything else combined. Told me that underneath the organization and the held rooms and the one photograph and the 2 fingers barely lifted from a table, there was a person who had been very carefully keeping himself to himself for a very long time. And who had, for reasons I was still working out, decided to stop. For me. For a Saturday morning pour-over in a cafe with a chalk menu board that spelled cappuccino with 1 P. I finished my coffee. He finished his. Outside, the city was bright and ordinary and going about its business. We walked out together, onto the sidewalk into the Saturday light. He stopped. I stopped. Next Saturday, he said. Where? A pause. Let me think about that. Okay, I said. Okay, he said. I turned and started walking toward the subway. I made it almost half a block before I allowed myself to smile private, full, just for me. Just for the warm and terrifying thing that had taken up residence somewhere in the center of my chest. I did not turn around. But I knew, in the way that you sometimes simply know things without evidence or reason, that he was still there on the sidewalk watching me go. And I knew that look too. He chose a restaurant that required a reservation made 3 months in advance. I know this because I looked it up. Not to be impressed, I simply wanted to understand the scale of what I was walking into so I could dress appropriately and not feel ambushed by my own environment. The kind of research I tell myself is practical and which might, in certain lights, be interpreted as caring what he thinks. I wore midnight blue, not the black gown from the Jade Pavilion that felt like going backward. Something different, something chosen for this specifically, a clean-lined dress, structured at the shoulder that I felt like myself in rather than like a performance of a self. My grandmother's earrings again. They were at this point becoming something of a talisman. Marcus picked me up at 8, which I had not expected and could not quite figure out how to react to. I sat in the back of the car and looked out the window at the city and gave myself a quiet and very firm talking to about the fact that I was being picked up by a driver employed by the man I was going to dinner with, and this was not a regular Tuesday, and I needed to maintain some equilibrium. The restaurant was on the 34th floor of a building that had, as far as I could tell, no other publicly accessible floors. The elevator opened directly into the dining room. The maitre d' knew my name before I said it. Hyunjae was already there. He stood when he saw me stood fully, immediately, with a quality of attention that was different from how he moved in professional contexts. Less guarded, or not less guarded, but differently guarded. The same containment, but directed differently. Toward me rather than away from everything. "You're on time," he said. "I'm always on time," I said. "Good," he said. We sat. The menu was the kind with no prices. I didn't flinch. He noticed me not flinching and I caught the noticing. "Tell me," I said once we had ordered, "how this city works, the version you know." He looked at me for a moment, calibrating. "That's a large question," he said. "I have all evening." "Why do you want to know?" "Because you move through it differently than other people. And I think the way you see it tells me more about you than anything you'd say directly." The almost smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, and it was a little more this time, a little less contained, which I was choosing to receive as a good sign. "The city," he began, "runs on agreements. That's all it is. Public agreements, like laws, and private agreements that operate underneath them. Most people only see the public layer. They think the public layer is the structure. It's not. It's the surface." "And the private layer is the structure," I said. "The private agreements determine almost everything that looks from the outside like it happened by itself. Who builds where? Who gets the contract? What gets reported? What doesn't? And you operate in that layer." He met my eyes. "I operate across both." "Is that a comfortable place to be?" "No," he said without hesitation. "But it's the position you hold." "The position I was born into and choose not to leave," he said. "Which is not exactly the same thing." I thought about that. "Why didn't you leave?" "Because leaving creates a vacuum. And vacuums are filled. I would rather be the thing filling it than spend my life wondering what took my place." I looked at him across the table in the restaurant on the 34th floor, the city a glittering field below us, and understood several things simultaneously. I understood that he had just given me more of himself than he gave most people. I understood that this was, for him, both unusual and intentional. I understood that the position he described, straddling layers, maintaining control, being the thing that fills the space rather than the thing that wonders, was exhausting in a way he would never say directly, but that was visible to me anyway. The way the shape of a building is visible from its shadow. And I understood that I was in danger of caring about that in a way that was going to be very difficult to walk back from. "Do you like it?" I asked. He seemed surprised by the question. Not troubled, simply surprised, as if it was an angle no one typically approached from. "Parts of it," he said finally, "the complexity, the problem-solving, the scale of it." "And the parts you don't like?" The longest pause yet. "The cost," he said, "of certain things." He didn't say what things. He didn't need to. I thought about one photograph in the world. I thought about a room full of men who moved when he lifted 2 fingers. I thought about a preferences and parameters document sent through layers of assistance for a home he'd been living in for 2 years and hadn't furnished. "You haven't decorated your home," I said, "before this, in 2 years. Why?" He looked at his wine glass. "I didn't know what I wanted it to feel like." "And now you do." He looked up at me. "I have a better sense." We ate. We talked. The conversation moved through things I hadn't expected, through art, which he knew about with a specificity that was clearly personal rather than cultivated through a city in South Korea where he'd spent time before coming here, describing it in a way that made me understand. He missed it without ever saying so through a question. He asked me about the moment I first knew interior design was what I was supposed to do. I told him about my grandmother's house, about being 7 years old and noticing that every room in her house made you feel a specific way that was distinct from every other room. That the kitchen was warmth and the study was calm and the living room was expansive, and I couldn't have named any of that at 7, but I felt it, and I wanted to understand why. "So you've always been reading spaces," he said. "I've always been reading people through spaces," I corrected. "The space is it's the external expression of the interior life of whoever made it." He looked at me. "Then what does my space say about me?" he asked. "It said you were someone who hadn't decided yet," I said. "An empty space doesn't say nothing. It says the person inside it hasn't committed to being known." The silence. "And now?" he asked. "Now the space is becoming something that holds, which means," I said carefully, "that you've decided to let yourself be held." He looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then he said quietly, "Or someone made me want to be." And there it was. No performance, no strategy, just a man across a table telling me the truth in the most direct way he knew how, which was, for him, enormous. I felt the full weight of it, the full significance. Not the romantic projection of it, not what I wanted it to mean, but what it actually meant, which was that Hyun Jae Kwon, the man with one photograph and two-finger authority and a room full of men who held their breath, was sitting across from me in a restaurant telling me that something had shifted in him, and that I was the reason. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, an enormous thing. And I held it the way I would hold something fragile and valuable, very carefully, very honestly with both hands. "I don't know what this is yet," I said. "Whatever this is between us, I don't know what it looks like in 6 months or what it costs or what it asks of me. I need you to know I'm not naive about the context." "I know you're not," he said. "And I need you to know I'm not interested in being someone's secret, or someone's uncomplicated moment, or something kept separate from a life." "I know that too," he said. "How do you know?" "Because you walked into a room full of men and you looked at me like I was a person before I was anything else," he said. "And then you made a joke." A startled laugh came out of me. He smiled. Actually, smiled, not the almost smile, but a real one, brief and warm and immediately contained. "I didn't know it was a joke at the time," I said. "I was terrified." "I know," he said. "You were terrified and you made a joke anyway. I have been thinking about that since that night." I looked at this man. This complicated, contained, enormously powerful, quietly lonely man, sitting across from me in his careful suit telling me he'd been thinking about me since the night I walked into the wrong room. "Okay," I said. "Okay?" "I'm not going anywhere," I said, "but we're going slowly and clearly, and I need to be able to trust what you tell me." "You will be able to," he said. "I intend to hold you to that." "I'm counting on it," he said. The restaurant was nearly empty now. The city below us was deep into its Friday night self, bright and moving and indifferent. Between us on the table was the wreckage of a good meal and two people who had just been more honest with each other than either of them had expected to be. I thought about what I'd told Priya. We're designing for the space, not the biography. I thought about how thoroughly I had violated my own principle. I thought about my grandmother's earrings and my mother's directness and the design I was building for a man who needed a place that held instead of commanded, and how that had somehow, across 3 chance encounters and 1 cup of coffee and 1 dinner, become intertwined with something else entirely. Marcus drove me home at midnight. In the elevator up to my apartment, I sent Camille one text. There was dinner. She responded in under 30 seconds, a string of emojis that I will not dignify by describing. I went to bed. I lay in the dark. I thought about a real smile, brief and warm and immediately contained. And I thought, Zara Ellison, you were absolutely in trouble. And you're going to walk toward it anyway. For 3 weeks it was just ours. That's the only word I have for that period, ours. Our dinners, our conversations, our carefully calibrated proximity. Not secret exactly. I didn't lie to Camille or Marcus or Priya, all of whom understood in varying degrees of specificity what was happening. But private. Held close. Existing in a space that hadn't yet been named or tested or exposed to the particular erosions of the outside world. We had dinner twice more after that first one. Both times at places that were private without being ostentatious. A small Korean restaurant in a neighborhood I hadn't known existed, where the owner recognized him and brought things to the table that weren't on the menu, and where I had the best dojanjang jjigae of my life, and where he translated the menu for me with a patience that was, in its own way, a form of intimacy. The second time was at a rooftop space in a hotel. Not the hotel's public rooftop. Some private arrangement where we ate by outdoor heaters, and he told me about his grandmother who had, he said, filled every room she entered with the very specific authority of someone who knew herself completely. She sounds like my mother, I said. She would have liked her, he said. The project was moving toward completion. This was both professionally satisfying and personally complex because the project had been the container for us. The reason we had the right to be in each other's orbits, and I was aware that completion would require us to decide what replaced it. He was aware of this too. I could tell by the way he sometimes paused in his mentions of the timeline, as if testing whether I noticed, which I did. I noticed everything about him now. That is the problem. I noticed the particular way he held his coffee cup, not by the handle but wrapped in both hands. Like someone who'd grown up cold and never fully forgotten it. I noticed that he asked questions before making statements in professional contexts, but in personal ones. It sometimes ran the other direction, statement first, then the question underneath it, more hesitant. I noticed that when something amused him, he controlled the expression in his face but couldn't always control it in his eyes, and that watching the amusement reach his eyes before it disappeared from his face was becoming one of my favorite things in the world. This was objectively a problem. And then, in the fourth week, the world noticed. It happened the way things happen now, obliquely, digitally, with the particular cruelty of a photograph taken without permission and a caption designed to generate maximum speculation. Someone at the Korean restaurant had been watching. AR had a camera. I didn't know who. A photograph appeared on an account. I'd never heard of an anonymous account with enough followers to matter, showing two people at a corner table. Him, recognizable to anyone who ran in certain circles. Me, my face clear enough. The caption said, KJ Kwan seen at private dinner with unknown woman. Anyone know who she is? I found out because Priya texted me at 6:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. Zara, have you seen this? Are you okay? Do you want me to come in early? I had not seen it. I was making my morning coffee when her text arrived, and I sat down on my kitchen floor, not dramatically, just the kind of sitting down that happens when your legs make a decision before your brain does, and looked at my phone. There were 6 messages from Camille, increasingly caps lock. I sat on the floor for a while. Then I called him. He answered on the first ring, which was the first time that it happened, and it told me something. You've seen it, he said. Yes, I said. I'm sorry, he said. I should have been more careful. Were you careless on purpose or by accident? I asked, and I meant it as a genuine question, not an accusation. It was important to me to know. A pause. Then, with something that sounded like respect. By accident. I wasn't thinking about it, which is unusual for me. What were you thinking about? You, he said simply. I was thinking about you. I put my head back against the cabinet. The city outside my window was doing its morning thing, garbage trucks, a bus, someone's alarm going off 2 floors up. Ordinary and indifferent. What happens now? I asked. Marcus can issue something, deny it's what it looks like, create an alternative explanation. Is that what you want to do? Another pause, longer. No, he said, it's not. Then what do you want to do? I want to handle this in whatever way protects you, he said, from the attention and from anything that might come from being associated with me publicly. That's what I want. What if I can handle it myself? You shouldn't have to. That's not an answer, I said. A breath on the other end. Then the answer is nothing. I want to do nothing. I want to let it be what it is. But that has consequences for you that I don't have the right to decide on your behalf. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long moment. Here's what I thought about. I thought about my firm, 3 years old, built on reputation and word of mouth and the labor of 4 people who believed in it. I thought about what it would mean to be publicly associated with a man like him, not just the social complication, but the professional one. Clients who might be cautious, opportunities that might become complicated. I thought about that fully and honestly. And then I thought about him saying I wasn't thinking about it. I was thinking about you. About a man who controlled entire rooms with 2 fingers, not thinking clearly because he was sitting at a dinner table thinking about me. I thought about that too. I need a day, I said. Take whatever you need, he said. I'll call you tonight. I'll be here. I got up off the kitchen floor. I made my coffee properly. I went to the studio. Priya looked at me when I walked in with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way of someone who has many feelings and has chosen professionalism. I'm fine, I said. Okay, she said. The walnut panels, have they been finished and sealed? Yesterday. They look incredible. Good, let's go look at them. We went to the penthouse. We looked at the panels, which were, in fact, incredible, warm and deep in exactly the weight I had imagined. Priya walked me through the rooftop progress, the planted zones taking shape, the Japanese maples small but already indicating their eventual presence. The basalt tile was down on the main floor. The space was becoming real. I stood at the west-facing window in the late morning light, the same light I had told him was architectural in itself, and I thought about what it means to build something. You choose materials. You choose how the light comes in and what it touches. You choose what the room holds and what it releases. Every choice is a statement about what you believe a life can feel like. He had let me choose all of that. He had read a document I sent and shown up in person and crouched next to me on a floor looking at tile samples and said this one, and pointed to the same one I'd chosen. That was not nothing. I called Camille at noon. Talk to me, she said immediately. Tell me what you think I should do, I said. Absolutely not, she said. That's not my decision. Tell me what you want to do. I was quiet for a moment. I don't want to walk away from it, I said. I've thought about it clearly and honestly, and I still don't want to. Okay, she said. That's probably not the smart thing. Zara, Camille said with the particular warmth she reserves for moments when she means something completely. Smart things and right things overlap less than people think. I called him that evening. I'm not going anywhere, I said, but I need you to understand what that means. Tell me, he said. It means I'm not a secret. Not from the people in my life and not from the world if the world decides to look. I can't be separated from my own life for the sake of yours. Whatever this is, it exists in full or not at all. A silence. Yes, he said. Yes, he said again, and his voice was quieter than usual, and under the quiets as there was something that sounded, distantly, like relief. Those are the terms I can agree to. Good, I said. Zara, he said. A pause, long enough that I thought he might not say it, then... Thank you for calling me. I thought about a man learning how to be held. Of course, I said. The penthouse was completed on a Thursday. I remember the specific quality of the afternoon November light, amber and low, the kind that makes everything look like it belongs in a painting of itself. The crew had done the final walkthrough that morning, every detail verified, every surface reviewed. Priya had done the staging, the carefully chosen objects, the books on the shelves selected for their spines' colors as much as their content, the single large-scale photograph on the northern wall that we had found at a gallery in the Arts District, a black-and-white image of a coastline, Korean taken at dawn that managed to be both austere and full of feeling. When I walked through the completed space alone, just me, before anyone else came, I stood in the center of the main living area and turned slowly and felt what I always feel when a space becomes fully itself. That quiet click of rightness. The room held. That is the only way I know how to say it. The black walnut, warm and substantial. The basalt tile underfoot, its variation creating depth without chaos. The light coming through the west windows at the angle I had calculated, touching the walnut panels and going amber, illuminating the space from within rather than flooding it from without. The sounds of the city, present but reduced by the acoustic choices we'd made, layered textiles, materials that absorbed the specific silence of a space that has been built to contain. It was the most beautiful work I had ever done. I allowed myself that. I stood there in the light, and I allowed myself to know it fully. Then I called him. "The space is ready," I said. A pause. "I'll be there at 6, he said. I stayed. I shouldn't have the professional protocol at project completion is a formal walkthrough scheduled in advance, documented, signed off on. I stayed anyway. I sat on the window bench I had specified, low, wide, upholstered in a deep charcoal linen, and I watched the November light change as the afternoon moved toward evening. Marcus arrived first, did a security sweep of the space with a quiet efficiency I had come to accept as simply part of the atmosphere of this work. He nodded at me as he left. Not a smile exactly, but the nod of someone who has decided to approve of you. Hyunjae arrived at 6. The elevator opened and he walked out into the completed space, and I watched him stop. He stopped the way you stop when something lands unexpectedly, when the thing you were preparing for turns out to be different from what you prepared for, not better or worse, just more real. He stood there and looked at the room. He looked at the walnut and the tile and the light on the wall and the photograph, and away the space opened through the 3 levels and came back to itself. He turned slowly, not the way I had turned, verifying, cataloging, but the way you turn when you're trying to feel something with your whole body rather than just see it with your eyes. I stayed where I was on the window bench and let him have it. After a long time, he turned toward me. "Come see the rooftop," I said. We went up. The rooftop at dusk was something I was proud of in a way that felt almost too personal for professional satisfaction. Priya's Japanese maples had been lit warm uplighting that caught the burgundy of their leaves in the November air. The privacy screens of ornamental grass moved slightly in the wind. The central platform held its low furniture, 2 wide seats, the kind that hold you. The city was visible beyond the screens, but somehow from inside them it felt at a remove, present without being intrusive. He stood at the edge of the platform and looked at the city, and the dark sky above it. "Year-round," he said. "The heated planters are integrated into the platform base," I said. "The maples will drop their leaves in winter, but the grasses hold. It'll look different, not less." He turned toward me. "It's extraordinary," he said. "I know," I said. He made the sound, that brief, low sound that I had learned was him laughing without deciding to. His eyes in the warm uplight were warmer than I had seen them. "You never apologize for knowing things," he said. "Why would I?" "You wouldn't," he said. "It's one of the things." He stopped, then started again more deliberately. "It's one of the things I find most. It's one of the reasons." He was not, I had learned over these weeks, a man who struggled for words. He was precise and articulate, and chose his language with care. When he struggled, it meant something. I waited. "You make me want to be plainly spoken," he said, "which is not something I've wanted before. It's easier in my position to remain." He searched. "Strategic." "And with me?" "With you," he said, "the strategy falls apart. I find that I would rather you know what I mean than protect myself from having meant it." The city hummed below us, the maples moved. I crossed the platform to where he was standing. He was still. He was always still. But this stillness was different. Not the controlled, calibrated stillness of a man managing a room. The stillness of someone who has decided to wait and see what happens next and is entirely there for it. "I'm finishing the project tonight," I said. "Professionally, the documentation will be complete by tomorrow." "I know," he said. "So I'm not your designer anymore?" "No," he said. "Good," I said. He looked at me. "Zara," he said. "Hyun Jae," I said, using his name for the first time without the title. I had been deliberate about that. The title was distance, and I was done with distance. Something moved through his face, full and real and not immediately contained. "I have to tell you something," he said. "Tell me," I said. "I have not." He took a breath. A real one, the kind that precedes something that matters. "In many years, I have not allowed myself to want something this clearly and simply, without angles, without calculation. I'm not always sure I know how to do it. But I want to." I thought about a man in a room that holds. I thought about 2 fingers barely lifted. I thought about the almost smile and the real one and the particular way he held his coffee cup with both hands. I thought about everything he'd told me across evenings and coffee and a rooftop in November, and how each thing told had been a choice to let me closer, and how many times he could have chosen not to. "You're doing fine," I said. A pause. "That's all?" "That's enough," I said. "You said something true and I'm telling you you're doing fine. Start there." He was quiet. Then slowly, the way someone does something they're learning, he reached out and took my hand. Not dramatically. Not with any of the gravity or command that characterized every other thing he did in the world. Just his hand finding mine and holding it in the November air on a rooftop in a city that was going about its enormous, indifferent business below us. And I held it back. The maples moved in the wind. The city hummed. Somewhere very far below, the world continued in all its complexity and noise and weight. Up here for now, it was just this. A room that holds 2 people deciding to let themselves be held. I thought about the night I walked into the wrong room and found him at the center of it. I thought about, "Are you lost?" and how the answer was yes and also no and also yes, but I think I am finding my way. I thought about my grandmother's earrings and my mother's voice saying, "Whoever you are in every room, be that completely." I was completely, entirely, wholly here. "Dinner?" he said. "Yes," I said. "Not the formal kind," he said. "Something smaller." I looked at him. "The place with the chalk menu board?" The real smile, full, warm, arrived without being summoned. "Yes," he said. "Then yes," I said. We stood there a moment longer in the November dark, the city below us, the maples above, the space it held, doing exactly what I had built it to do. And I thought, this is not the end of anything. This is the beginning of a much more complicated, much more interesting, much more entirely worth it kind of story. And I, Zara Ellison, was ready for every page of it. If this story moved you in any way, give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more. And let's talk in the comments what stood out to you the most, and what did you learn? I'm reading every comment.